A small number of fantastically wealthy individuals in the United States are channeling staggering amounts of their fortunes towards manipulating the prevailing economic and political ideologies in America, and they are succeeding. Since the 1970s, a few extremely wealthy donors have poured hundreds of millions of dollars, often anonymously or as tax-deductible philanthropy, into an intricate network of organizations designed to disseminate a ruthlessly anti-government worldview. They are radical libertarians that believe in an eventual end to all taxation, to all social security, to minimum wage laws, to campaign finance laws, to all regulations on the free market and the environment, as well as an end to all government involvement in education, healthcare, and the prison system. With public trust in government near historic lows, increasing corporate power, and continuous tax cuts on the most wealthy, they are closer to their goals than ever. At the center of this movement are Charles and David Koch, owners of Koch Industries, a diversified conglomerate with its origins in oil refineries, who have a combined fortune of almost $100 billion. For decades, they, along with a handful of exceptionally wealthy individuals, have channeled enormous sums into a variety of organizations promoting a future where government plays virtually no role in people's lives. Their ideologies have begun penetrating every possible aspect of American society. They have strategically targeted America's education system, the judiciary, the media, and the nation's politicians to get the best possible return on their investments. They are guided by seminal libertarian thinkers like F.A. Hayek, who believed rigidly in the importance of personal liberty, that individuals should have absolute control over their actions and their property, that without government intervention, like taxes, public spending, and regulations, free markets would create a spontaneous order. As Hayek himself puts it,
"We will benefit our fellow men most if we are guided solely by the striving for gain. For this purpose we have to return to an automatic system which brings this about, self-directing automatic system which alone can restore to liberty and prosperity. That is my fundamental conception."
Isn't it a philosophy based essentially on selfishness? What about altruism? Where does that come in?
It doesn't come in.
Another key thinker was Murray Rothbard, who stated that it was the intervention of the state that in itself created the classes and the conflict, and that there was no way whatever of defining taxation that was not also applicable to the tribute exacted by a robber gang. As well as James Buchanan, who developed public choice theory, positing that politicians and public servants would all act only out of their own self-interest.
The illusion would be that our politicians are out there really seeking to do good for us. Not for themselves, but do good for us. A kind of an optimistic illusion that he's doing good for the public.
A key tenet of this kind of libertarian thinking is that all individuals act solely based on their own self-interest. It eliminates any ideas of a social contract, morality, or obligations and relationships to fellow citizens as guiding forces behind individuals' actions. Heavily influenced by these thinkers, Charles Koch has laid out his vision that government must serve as a night watchman to protect individuals and property from outside threat, including fraud. This is the maximum. Essentially believing that government should be reduced to a police force to protect citizens and their property from each other, and a military to protect the nation. However, during the 1960s and 70s, America was moving decisively in the opposite direction. The rise of the consumer protection movement led to a flurry of new regulations on businesses. Congress passed a range of laws designed to safeguard the environment from industry, and in 1970, Nixon created the EPA and OSHA essentially to police business. A product of this rapid escalation in the size of government, and one of the sparks that ignited this radical libertarian movement, was the Powell Memorandum. Issued by Lewis Powell before accepting Nixon's nomination to the Supreme Court, it called for corporate America to play a bigger role in shaping the nation's approach to government. In 1974, Charles Koch gave a speech saying, "As the Powell Memorandum points out, business and the enterprise system are in trouble, and the hour is late." Charles Koch saw a need for an intellectual movement that could spread the free market libertarian ideologies of Hayek and all those others that had inspired him, he stated, "The development of a well-financed cadre of sound proponents of the free enterprise philosophy is the most critical need facing us today." In 1978, he wrote an article in the Libertarian Review saying, "Ideas do not spread by themselves. They spread only through people," which means we need a movement. Our movement must destroy the prevalent statist paradigm. And he was not alone. The Powell Memorandum acted as a catalyst. Other enormously wealthy individuals also began pouring millions of dollars into organizations designed to stop the state from encroaching on their economic liberties. In 1917, after the 16th Amendment to the Constitution had made income tax a permanent fixture of the tax system, an exemption was made allowing unlimited tax-deductible charitable donations. In her book, and one of the inspirations and sources for this video, Dark Money, Jane Mayer explains how this has led to what she calls weaponized philanthropy.
What I'm talking about weaponizing philanthropy is, and it's actually a quote from somebody who was part of it, someone named Jim Pearson describes these philanthropies as the artillery. And what they were trying to do was wage a war of ideas that would turn the country around and change the way Americans thought, which would eventually change the way they voted.
Jane Mayer explains how Richard Mellon Scaife's family are seen as some of the pioneers of using philanthropy as a means to influence state policy and public opinion. Heir to an oil and banking fortune, his parents had established the tax-exempt Sarah Scaife Foundation as a means of sheltering their enormous wealth from high taxes during and following the Second World War. Many others, such as Sheldon Adelson of the Las Vegas Sands Corporation, John M. Olin, president of Olin Industries, chemical and munitions businesses, Joseph Coors of the Coors Brewing Company, and the co-founder of Amway, Richard DeVos, have all started tax-deductible foundations to push free market principles similar to those of Charles and David Koch. They identified the need for an intellectual force of scholars and educators to channel the libertarian ideology into mainstream American political and economic thought. The judicial system was also seen as a focal point for this campaign of ideas. The donors sought to develop more free market-aligned interpretations of the law, and most importantly, they sought to train policymakers to develop real-world applications of their libertarian ideas that could eventually be sold to politicians. Richard Fink, the Koch's main political operative, formulated a three-stage plan to build this cadre of libertarian thinkers. As he put it, the first phase consisted of investment in the intellectual raw materials, the exploration and production of abstract concepts and theories. In the second phase, ideas are applied to a relevant context and molded into needed solutions for real-world problems. This is the work of the think tanks and policy institutions, with the final phase calling for the development of coalitions of individual citizens and special interest groups needed to press for the implementation of policy change. One of the earliest and most significant of these organizations is the Cato Institute, founded in 1976 by Charles Koch and the libertarian thinker Murray Rothbard. Cato has pushed for the privatization of Social Security, and many members of Cato have promoted climate change skepticism on mainstream media outlets. David Boaz, executive vice president of Cato, has written of a parasite economy, an underclass that votes rather than works for a living. The organization also played a major role in organizing and providing materials for the Tea Party protests starting in 2009. Another major group is the Heritage Foundation, started with a $250,000 endowment from the Adolf Coors Foundation. It went on to publish a comprehensive package of conservative policy suggestions for the Reagan administration, delivered to every member of Congress in 1981, laying out 1,270 conservative policy proposals, 61% of which were adopted by the Reagan administration. It is now partly headed by Rebecca Mercer, daughter of Steve Bannon's former donor, Robert Mercer, as well as several well-known Koch associates. And the organization was also heavily involved in President Trump's transition team. The Reason Foundation has made the case for selling off public property, outsourcing public services and privatization, managed by Robert Poole, who has said, He figured that if you could gradually build up to socialism, you could probably undo it, dismantling the state step by step, by privatizing one function after the other, selling each move as justified for its own sake rather than waiting until the majority of the population is convinced of the case for a libertarian utopia. Poole has even proposed imposing user charges for access to public goods like parks. Other focal points for this libertarian movement are the Institute for Humane Studies and the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. The former dean of the law school at GMU, Henry Maine, saw the need to target the judicial system of America with libertarian ideology. As Powell had written in his memorandum, the judiciary may be the most important instrument for social, economic, and political change. Maine created a new way of approaching legal issues called law and economics, stressing the need to consider the economic impact of laws and regulations. In 1985, the Olin Foundation donated $18 million to establish the John M. Olin Center for Law, Economics, and Business at Harvard. Many involved in the movement believed that by gaining ground in Ivy League schools, there would be a trickle-down effect of libertarian thought. By 1990, law and economics had spread to almost 80 law schools around the country. Not all schools were so easily seduced. The law school's curriculum committee at UCLA found that the Olin-sponsored program was taking advantage of students' financial need to indoctrinate them with a particular ideology. However, by 2005, the Olin Foundation had spent half of its $370 million endowment on promoting conservative ideology on campuses around the country. Maine, with further funding from the Olin Foundation, also ran luxury 2-week all-expenses-paid seminars in law and economics for judges all over the country, where they were treated to a Koch-approved curriculum. 40% of all federal judges are reported to have attended these seminars, including Supreme Court Justices Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Clarence Thomas. There are hundreds of similar organizations pursuing the dissemination of small government and pro-free market ideologies, and this has become a global effort, with similar groups operating on every continent. Since Koch money helped stun Democrats in the 2010 midterm elections and hamstring President Obama's White House, they, along with many of their fellow donors, have frequently been in the media spotlight. However, what is often neglected is the work done by this network outside of national politics. By gradually and discreetly spreading their libertarian ideas throughout the nation's educational institutions and the judiciary, they have taken what was once just a fringe ideology grounded on self-interest and the sanctity of personal property and helped make it a mainstream worldview for millions of Americans. That government can offer nothing to those who are most marginalized, and that we should put our trust in the free market to alleviate the ills of our society, has regrettably become a more accepted view of the world.